Hello, I'm Hilary Harper. I present Life Matters on Radio National. And I'd like to say a big thank you to the original storytellers on this land too. First Nations peoples' narratives have shaped this country for millennia and continue to do so. And I'm very proud to be able to hopefully continue that tradition tonight. Who is this man? I mean, really, I think if you're here, you don't need me to go on about Bob Brown very much. And you've just seen the gorgeous fruits of the labour of Rachael, Antony and Laurence, Billiet, that beautiful film they produced and directed. Bob, we've all seen the stickers on your toilet now. What's it like having so much of your life up on the screen, not directly tied to a media event around a campaign?
Hi, Hilary. Quite amazing. And I took no role in formulating or writing or censoring this film. Laurence and Rachael came and asked, would I do it? And the hook, of course, was the big trees, because we're okay, but they're not. And the life story, you know, life has twists and turns, and I've had lots of young people come up and say, I wish I was like you. And I'm able to say to them, when I was 20-something, I couldn't get up in an audience like this and ask a question. I was too nervous. And after a while, if you're devoted to something that's got depth and truth to it, and saving planet Earth fits into that category, it comes along. I'm very regretful that it came so late to me, but now I don't mind about the earlier travails. I recognise that a lot of people relate to those in their own way, having their own troubles. So, talking about it while you're still alive is a good thing, because it does. I mean, the real thing here is to motivate, to put an arm around people our own age, my own age, who have had their own troubles in life, but also to motivate young people to say, well, don't get depressed, get active.
I was listening to an ABC podcast on saving the Franklin recently, in which you oddly feature quite heavily. I was wondering if part of the motivation for being involved in this film too was wanting to tell more of the story of activism and environmentalism in this country, because it is quite easy for us to forget, I think, where those achievements come from.
Yes, Hilary, and licensing it, because we live in a society where we've still got a largely Anglo-Saxon background which says don't get involved. And we still have, but we are also we have a culture of contentment, as J.K. Galbraith, the great American economist, put it. And getting out of our comfort zone to speak up for other people who aren't in our circumstances, or for our fellow creatures, and in particular for future generations, our kith and kin and our fellow creatures' kith and kin, is it can be problematic, and people worry about it, but we shouldn't. And I hope there's nobody here that might write this up, but I'm going back out to the forest on Friday. They're currently, you might have seen the single loader that they've taken out of the Florentine forest in central Tasmania. You know, these are massive. These are the one measured at 134 metres in Gippsland, talking about mountain ash or Eucalyptus regnans, the tallest tree ever measured on Earth. And here's the next generation coming up, and they're smashing them down. And I'll be going back out there on Friday with friends people were out there today, to make a stand, because they have no voice, but if I can put it this way, we're in a materialist capitalist society where money rules. And if you rob a bank, take other people's money, you'll go to jail. But if you rob future generations, the government will give you a subsidy. And we've got to think about that and change it, because Earth is all we've got. And we have no right to plunder it at the expense of the coming generation. I can tell you, when that's realised, it's a wonderful feeling to get active, and I can't let the opportunity pass but to take my hat off to the Victorian activists, and it's them who did it, who put at least a halter on logging of Victoria's great forest. I know it won't be the end of it, but a massive breakthrough. And they've got a stall outside. Please take some goods. We've got some, our foundation's Bill Pheasants out there as well. So as you go, please have a look at those stalls. And there's something all of us can do. And in particular, don't vote for people who want to smash down more forests. It's pretty simple in a democracy.
Rachael and Laurence, what prompted you to make this film right now? Why did you want to tell this particular story?
Is this on? Yeah. Well, it's interesting because obviously the story of Bob Brown is a good story, but we didn't realise what a great story it was until we started making it and we had this story that was bigger than Ben-Hur. But the starting point really was the fires, because we were, as I'm sure many people here, were devastated by the legacy of those fires. We were here in Melbourne, shrouded by smoke, all this extraordinary natural heritage incinerated in the context of the climate change. And we were already very, I guess, moved by the issue of the climate crisis. And then soon after the smoke cleared, the loggers went back in and they began salvage logging. So we had our forests that were, I guess, so destroyed, and there was so little. Sorry. It's the last night, and maybe it's just catching up with me, but.
I don't think we should apologise for getting emotional about this stuff.
No, it was just too much. It was like, enough is enough. Like, humans never say, we've got enough now. We'll leave something for you.
I found it really interesting that you said in an interview that you didn't think of yourselves as environmentalists before you started making the film. Where are you at now?
Well, I was wearing an owl outfit at the Rally for Forest a couple of weeks ago on the steps of the Parliament. Outfit. That's how bad it got. It's been a journey, and to have I mean, we're a bit emotional, both of us, aren't we? It's the last big screening we're doing here, and what a venue! And I think it's testimony to the power of place and places, good architecture, great forests. It's something that connects us, and I think we're very moved to be here. Anyway, yes, so we didn't start as activists at all. We were just normal people, and we thought, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? We felt very powerless. And we have a very, a job that in many ways is not that useful, making films, So we were like, how useful is that? And then we thought maybe we should do a film about forests, about trees, and we started thinking along those lines, and we just wanted to do a film that would open people's mind to the beauty of forests, really. And you can hear it from my accent, which gets worse when I'm speaking to many people. But I'm French originally, and when we started working on this film, we were stunned to realize that there is no old-growth forest left in the whole of Europe. And so what we've got here as Australians, we just don't really know how special it is. And we'll probably just realize until when it's gone, it'll be too late. So it sort of was a motivation, I guess, for us, was to try to find a way using cinematic language to open people's heart to the forests that are here in Australia and get people involved in saving it. And the film has radicalized us. As much as anyone else watching it, I think we've been really happy to see a lot of people taking action. And I'll start by saying that one thing you could do if you feel like doing something for those beautiful forests you saw in the film is there's a submission ending tomorrow to save the Tarkine forest from being used as a dumping ground for a Chinese mining company who's planning to dump the chemical waste and on this forest that we filmed, and basically drown an entire valley under 30 meters of chemical waste. So one thing you can do is go online to defendthegiants.org and spend 2 minutes filling up this submission, and hopefully we can be as successful as the beautiful people who did 30,000 submissions against the proposed plan to have what do you call it again? The thing
Seismic.
Seismic what?
Explosions.
Well, seismic blasts outside of the Melbourne and Tasmania. So we live in a democracy, and I think 80%, in fact, a poll has said that over 85% or 80% of Australians are against native forest logging, and that was the same 40 years ago when we did the research into this film. The polls were 80% of Australians oppose what is being done to forests. Still continues today. So we live in a democracy. If the governments, Liberal or Labor, are not hearing us, we need to make more noise.
Part of the challenge around any campaign is how to communicate the urgency and the information in a way that's very engaging. And those animations that you used to get the tree science over were incredible. How did you come to that choice for the film?
Well, I can start. Well, I guess one of the challenges was a lot of people are used to watching nature documentaries, and there's beautifully made David Attenborough films. And so people were quite used to seeing these very hyper-realistic, crystal clear images of the forest. And what we wanted to connect with was more of an imaginary space or an emotional space in relation to the forest. So we wanted to treat it more in a, I guess, slightly more romantic way, and also just allow people's imaginations to flow a little bit. So one of it came down to the treatment of the actual forest itself and how we would film that. And the other was around the animation, which I'll let Laurence explain.
Yes, so we were challenged by filming the forest because you point a camera to a tree and absolutely nothing goes on, which for a film is challenging. So we did work on that and use a lot of smoke machines, as you can see in the film, but ultimately we thought we need to go beyond that, and we came across the work of this French animator, and there's absolutely no connection at all. It was the random magic of the internet. Saw his work online, and he had been, as a pet project, scanning trees in the forest near where he lives in France, in Brittany, and doing those 3D rendering that you see. So we approached him, and then we approached University of Tasmania. That's got quite a cutting-edge department specializing in spatial mapping, as in they do a lot of 3D scanning of trees. And so we got University of Tasmania to scan those trees that we had filmed. We cast 3 trees for this film. And we and Bob as well, and so that was easier. But we found our trees, and then we filmed them, and then we scanned them with sort of laser scans and drone scans, and then send the data to Alex in France, who and Alex hasn't been to Australia, so yet with COVID and everything and children and whatever. So. He worked on this, and as soon as he got the data from us, he called us in a panic, saying, I cannot see the tree. So there's like a 100-meter tree, like in the scan, like 2 meters into it, and he cannot see the tree. And he's like, where is the tree? And it turns out that so intense and rich was the data, as in what was around the tree and the ecosystem around the tree and the plants and everything around it, that it was actually masking the actual tree. And for us, that spoke volume about the absolute richness of old-growth forest. And this is something that is very rare and exists nowhere else in the world. And so we worked with him to create those sort of forestscapes that can take people on a journey to see the hidden flows and feel really the hidden flows of what's going on that our eyes can't see.
Bob, I wanted to ask you about the way you've conducted campaigns, because obviously you're driven for a passion for these trees and for the forests, and you're renowned as a very peaceful campaigner. Have you ever considered violent protest?
Oh, what a good question. No, but I have had people, always male, come up to me and say, "You got this wrong. You know, I can fix it for you. I'll go out there and deal with those machines." And I say, "Do that, Buster," and they get what they want. It's a story of activism right around the world, that the state and the corporate sector has the money, they have the police, they have the army, they have the guns. You cannot beat them on that ground. But what they don't have is the heart of the people. And we are bonded to forests, and we're physically and mentally very much attuned because they're our background home. And that's why the polls are showing that 87% of Labor voters want an end to native forest logging, and Albo at the Labor National Conference a week ago went with the 13%. But that will change. And the other thing that I'm always listened to was Rachael, Senator Richardson, who was the formidable Environment Minister under Bob Hawke. At the time, the Daintree and Kakadu and other places were protected. But about the Tasmanian forest outside Parliament House in Canberra one day, and this is old Parliament House, he said to me, "Bob, I can't hear the sound of the crowd roaring." In other words, if you're going to give me the political clout to change what they're saying in there, we need to hear the people on the move, not just an opinion poll, but they need to be on the move. And so our job is to motivate people by showing them the destruction, by going out there, showing them the beauty of the forest, but also the destruction, and then doing whatever we can to motivate people to get active. And there is at the moment, I've lived long enough to be through the revolution of the 60s, and there's a similar feeling in the air, just across the spectrum. It's very fraught times, as it was back then, but there's bright-eyed young women and men who are on the move, and if they can only get past the feeling that it's all too hopeless, it's too difficult, it is too violent, there's an enormous power in the ability to transform society through peaceful action, whether it's voting, whether it's displacing the members of parliament, whether it's marches on the street. We had rallies, 750 people with Laurence in her owl suit in front of Parliament House here a bit over a week ago. And next is March. In March, we'll have street rallies around the country. New Zealand stopped native forest logging, a Labor government there under a huge petition in 2002. We're more than 2 decades down the line. We've got enough plantations to meet all Australia's wood needs and still export more. We don't need to be doing this destruction. And when they talk about the number of jobs in the logging industry, ask them how many of those are in plantations. It's 80 to 90%. This native forest logging is a remnant cost on society in every way you look at it. So the whole argument is with us, but the political power base isn't. And if I can just, Hillary, say that our little foundation has just appointed Fesna as a lobbyist in Canberra. She's the single full-time environmental lobbyist in Canberra. There are dozens of logging, mining, other corporate interests all the time in Canberra. I used to see that when I was there as a senator. But not a single environmentalist. Well, if you don't have a place at the table, you don't have a place in the decision. So we're changing that. And it's a work in progress. And it's going to succeed. But the question is how much damage will occur before this country comes to grips with the fantastic nature that we have, and of course stops mining fossil fuels, coal and gas, and this government's not going to do that. So we have to keep moving on because they're an enormous threat to the environment. Look at Antarctica, and we've just appointed an Antarctic campaigner as well. So we're on the way, but but going back to your question, it's getting to the public both how important this is, how urgent it is, and how if we do nothing about it, we are simply robbing those great-grandchildren of ours.
You talked about all the different fronts on which it's necessary to campaign, but also about the violence of the state. And the first protester in Tasmania to be jailed for 10 years, just gone to jail in the last month. What does the future of activism look like in that context when, you know, some of the avenues that used to be open to us are not open anymore?
Yeah, she's in jail, and I went and visited her the other day. She's a veterinarian and a Tassie devil for simply standing peaceably in front of a tree. You know, in Tasmania now, the laws are such that standing peacefully in front of a tree full of rare and endangered creatures that they want to bulldoze down is a criminal offence equivalent to going into your neighbour's house with a shotgun and terrorising that family. Same penalties. This is because the corporate sector said to weak-spined politicians, bring through this legislation, and the legislation around the country, including in Victoria, is very similar to that which Boris Johnson brought in London. You can see the corporate barristers going around, and many states in the US as well, and saying, we can't win the environmental argument, the public's with them. We've got to get rid of those environmentalists, take them to jail. But Paul's down the front here, and thank goodness. I was saying to Paul the other day, well, if we got that lovely policeman who had to arrest me there a while ago, that case comes up for hearing on Extinction Day, September the 7th, and then the case will be before the Magistrates Court in December, and I and the two women who were arrested with me face 3 years in jail. And this is right out of hand. However, I do have one book to write yet, Hilary, and I can't think of a better place than Risdon to do just that.
The look on Paul's face is quite interesting right now. I want to acknowledge Paul's contribution to Bob. How important has he been to the successes we've seen tonight? Totally. I wouldn't be here without Paul. He's sitting here by himself in the front, and but he, as I say in the film, I just didn't think such a wonderful relationship could come my way. So, and he's got to hurry back in the morning because the first lamb in his flock of ewes, which he looks after prodigiously, has just arrived, and the lambing season is on, and I help a little bit on the farm. The poor old sheepdog died, and Paul tells me I'm too slow and I don't take orders. But the paying conditions aren't real good either. But we've got a terrific companionship, and I just wish everybody else on earth finds such joy as we find in each other's company. That's going on my dating app profile now. Just before we finish up and go to questions from you guys, I want to ask you, Rachael and Laurence, I mean, this screening is part of the Wild Hope exhibition. You can see elements of it at the Design Hub Gallery at RMIT. What does that mean to you today in the context of the, you know, the political and social systems we've been talking about today?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think on one hand, Wild Hope sounds exciting. I think it's something that we'll have to hold on to, and I think if we think about the mycelium network and how that's so incredibly wild, I think we need to be part of that mycelium network. And actually, I just wanted to say something about where we are, because it was designed by two Chicago architects, Mary Mahoney Griffin and her husband, Walter Burley Griffin, who you may have heard of. He's the one who gets his name on the down for the design for Canberra. And they were urban designers, architects, but they were also, very importantly, nature lovers. They were environmentalists when they first went to Canberra. They designed the city around the existing natural beauty points, and they envisaged revegetating all the hills that had been denuded by, you know, chopping the trees down for firewood and so on. They went to Sydney, they developed Castle Crag, and they had sort of quite low houses, and they went around planting native plants, which nobody else was doing. They were ripping them out. And Mary Mahoney Griffin had a particular beauty love of Australian plants. And so why am I talking about this? Because I want to read a quote from her, which I think is kind of apt. And she said, she's talking about Canberra specifically. In planning Canberra, every detail of the natural conditions was thoroughly studied in order to preserve them. Such reverence for our Mother Earth is acutely necessary now, for the rate of destruction is increasing so rapidly that even a century or two may make the Earth incapable of supporting life. So we're now 100 years, I think, the centenary of Canberra took place recently, and I think we can all say that Mary Mahoney Griffin was right, as I'm sure she often was on many things. So I guess what's interesting about where we are now in this university setting, you know, attached to the Department of Design, we've got architects, we've got all kinds of professionals in here. We're all part of the problem that we have now, which is on this earth and our rate of consumption and so on, our way of living. But we are also, in terms of our resources and our knowledge and our education, we're also part of the solution. So I think what would give us wild hope, and what is perhaps the wild hope, is that everybody goes home tonight and thinks about where their place is in this network of solutions.
And Bob, while you're waiting for your court case to come up, when are you off to the forest again next?
Friday, but don't tell anybody.
Oh, yeah.
Our foundation will go out there and walk on to the logging field. There's 5 very large yellow contraptions, bulldozer-like contraptions and log pickers and machines of destruction in this forest. And the fernery that we saw 2 weeks ago is now in the bulldozer tracks. It's been completely pulverised. It's the most beautiful fernery, I've been around a lot, I've ever seen on Earth. And I said to companions 2 weeks ago, the difficulty here would be putting in a trail which would allow people to impact-free see this fernery without destroying it. Well, they've destroyed it, and zero. Actually, they're being subsidised to do that. This is, under the laws of nature, this is a huge criminal behaviour, but it's endorsed by governments. And so we'll be out there on Friday, all being well, and I intend to stay there until they stop.
Cone of silence, obviously. We're going to hear some questions from some RMIT people. Rachael, who is a student, and Brian, who is a staff member. Let's start with Brian, because I think we know where he is. As soon as we have a roving mic near you, Brian.
Thanks. Thank you. Firstly, just thanks to the filmmakers for making such an absolutely fantastic film. It's the second time I've seen it, and it's still as powerful as the first time, so thank you very much. And to Bob, thank you as well for being so amazing in everything you've done. Real humble leadership, which is totally amazing. But my question, I want to take it a little different direction, and it's something that the person in the middle talked about urban cities and how we live. And I'm kind of interested to know your thoughts about how we could mobilise people to take action to reconnect people with nature in the cities so we encounter it every day and we transform our economic systems in ways that are more sustainable. And that's a big question, but any thoughts on how do we make people love nature in the cities?
Well, you can take people out of nature, but you can't take nature out of people, and it's there in all of us. This is why we hand each other, as a sign of devotion, a bunch of real flowers. Hand a bunch of the most beautifully tailored and even perfumed artificial flowers to your beloved and see the reaction you get. And you know, you could write volumes on this, but it's as simple as that. The nature is within us. The question is, how do we get people to understand that those forests are theirs? They're not the Premier of the days, they're not the ministers, they're not the loggers, they're not the wood chippers or the exporters. They belong to the people, and we're being serially robbed of those. But going back to the finances of it, we are in a growth economy, and it just simply cannot continue. You know, if the rest of the world caught up with us and we grew by a modest 3%, and every government on the planet espouses growth economics, we would need 6 to 12 planets by the end of this century. We're already using 2 planets' worth of the living natural resources. That's why every day there's fewer forests, fewer species, more mouths to feed, 90% of fisheries gone or in collapse. We are in a perilous situation. And here's the real question, is we've got the instinct for greed ruling over the intellectual, God-given common sense, if you like, that we've got, that says we can't keep doing this. We have to pull our belts in, and we have to share, and we have to see ourselves as Earth citizens, not divided by nationalism and by petty political, religious or other differences. But we're a long way short of that. But either we do that, or those scientists who predict there may be 1 billion people on the planet by the end of this century we're going to sadly see something like that happen, quite unprecedented. And we're the biggest herd of mammals ever to graze the planet, and we're overgrazing it at a great rate. But we've got this intellect that says we've got to come back off that, and we need to do it together. And the thing that will do it is great leadership. And in amongst that next generation coming up, they're feeling aggrieved about this, they're angry about it, a lot of them are depressed, but in amongst those people is that great leadership. And our job as grey hairs, those very few of you in this audience who fit that description, is to license them to get going, is to license the young to change this world. Under the rubric of being fair and taking into account the next coming generations and the natural limits that this planet has. We're nowhere near that with the current ruling class here or elsewhere around the world. And we've got to, my going out to the forest on Friday is not just a tilt at a windmill. There'll be a lot of young people there. I get to talk with all of them. They bring me great inspiration, and they tell me it feeds back in the other direction. And that's where I find life so well worth living, is inspiring young people to take this planet in their hands and do what we didn't do as a generation, make it something that's sustainable for all life on Earth into the future.
I love that story from the film of the young person who came up to you and asked your permission to go and sit in a tree. And you were like, off you go. That's great. Now, do we have Rachael? Yep.
Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful film and event. I was just wondering, I was really struck watching the film for the first time between the parallel storylines between your growing ecological and environmental activism and political career, and that of your experience of coming out and existing as a gay man in a time of extreme hatred. And I was sort of wondering if there was any lessons from either experience that informed the other, or vice versa.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and a difficult one, because we live within ourselves. We are our own beings, and we respond to our view from where we are of what's going on. And life can seem very, very unfair, and that is very easy to the measurement of seeing how well other people are doing in terms of happiness, for example, is one that can lead people to feel despair because they don't have it in their own lives. But the reality is that it's much better to measure ourselves by those people who are in a worse situation. I used to get asked during the Franklin campaign, Bob, you're getting spat at and there's a homophobia and the whole thing at play here. Why don't you get depressed? Well, over in Argentina, they were taking young socialists off the street, kidnapping them, giving their babies to other people amongst the generals and dropping them out, drugged out of helicopters into the River Plate. you know, and on Earth, you only got to look around as a gay man in my case, but with whatever difference we have that we see as holding us back or making us forward, whatever it is. Look at what's happening to people in our... we had the film at the Gay Pride Centre in St Kilda yesterday, and I haven't been to that place before. It is a stunner. But along the wall, so drop in if you're in St Kilda, it's 5 stories of everything you can think of going on. But along the wall at the moment, on the ground floor, is a display of women and men who are in Australia, but they're talking about what would be happening to them if they were back in Russia or Uganda or Sri Lanka. And it's you know, it just makes you think how lucky we are here. And if we can only overcome our own self-inhibition and think about that, and, you know, the world's... we'll be a good society when we can get everybody to express the best that's in them in the way they want to in life. A creative community in the future instead of an avaricious one. I hear that question very clearly. I think the only answer I can give is to talk about our experience, but to encourage people. Oh, finally, this. Saw the Dalai Lama in Adelaide 30 years ago, and a young woman was sitting there at the table, a 14-year-old, and she said, Your Holiness, what's the best thing a young person can have? And I thought, here comes compassion or love. And he grabbed her by the hand and looked over and looked her straight in the eye and said, self-confidence. Now that's more easily said than done, but to be confident to be yourself is everybody's right, and we need to be encouraging everybody to have that confidence.
Hands up if you've got a question, and one of the 2 roving mics will come and find you.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been a really wonderful evening. Bob, I just wanted to ask, because as a mother and a permaculturist and a hiker, I sometimes find it very hard to think about the future and what it holds for my children. How do you stay so optimistic?
I've got a little book coming. I'm sorry about this, Hilary. I've got a little book. Here comes a plug. It's not really, because this is very self-limited. 1,500 copies, Paul and I are basically publishing, called Thera. That's T-H-E-R-A. It's an anagram of Earth, and it's about another planet going down the chute, and it's aimed at older teenagers and young adults. And in that, the lovers discuss exactly this issue. I can only say that set the example and give those youngsters self-confidence. It's so important. And, you know, people say to me, would you like to be around in 100 years from now? Too right I would. Too right I would. I'd like to see what's going on and have a hand in it, provided we're still here. And your children and all children have a right to think that. But they can get lost along the way because the world's got some appalling things going on. It's very important to license young people to have fun, to see the beauty of life, to go to the bush or the beach once a week. Take them out there, because if they miss that early on, they won't get it later. It's similar to music. Don't get it early on. It's very hard to catch up with it later on. So take the Sunday picnic of the old days is a very wise thing for youngsters these days, and to let them know what a fortunate place we're in this lucky, democratic, wealthiest per capita, as Rachael was saying, country, if you take into account resources on the planet, and how they have the power to change things. Not somebody else, not the people they see on television, but they themselves. But having fun, getting the diploma, taking time out, the degree, going to parties, finding good companions, and if you're really desperate, go shopping. All these things are very, very important. I got grabbed by the lapel by Colonel David Hackworth, the most decorated US Marine of the Vietnam War in Hobart many years ago now, and he said, "Bob, you've got to stop all this nonsense about forestry. President Reagan's being re-elected, he's mad, he's going to blow up the world, you've got to do something." And I said to him, "David, if that's the case, I'm going home to read a book." It's important to let youngsters know that while there's life, there's hope, and while there's time, they have to live their life while contributing to a better future. That's the balance that we need to have. The overrun of anxiety is something we've got to stop young people being trapped by.
I think we've got time for another couple of questions. Do we have one good to go?
Hello. Hi, Bob. So, like usually when I used to see at trees, so when I see like fungi and bacteria on it, the first thought that comes to me, like every time when parents tell you about like, don't touch the random unknown stuff, you might get, deadly bacteria or something. So every single time when I see a tree with stuff on it, I usually just think about myself, like what I can get from that, like disease or something. But after this movie, like there was like, I understand that there are a lot of different factors, there are a lot of different stuff that involves a community, basically, which helps growing each other's, So that kind of like changed my perspective. Earlier, I was just thinking about myself. Now I'm thinking about like how things are working. So was there a particular fact or something that you found out like in studies or like by listening to somebody which like kind of attracted you towards the nature or like made you love it more?
Well, I've always seen, thanks for that question, I've always seen forest communities, and we've talked about them right down the line, and you know that if you take something out of it, all the rest will be somewhat changed. But it was Laurence and Rachael who came and said to me, as I think Laurence was saying earlier, there's all this new scientific literature on how forests work as communities. They're not individual trees. I think of old Bill Nagy, the Gagajoo man, who said to me, he's long since departed from us, "Bob, see that tree. He is thinking about us." Now you can take what you like from that, but these trees and humanity have we have a long relationship, and they're a community just the same as we are, and this film brings that out. We've got so much more to find out about that, and hearing David Suzuki talk about it, of course, is colossal. Yes, it's transformative, and one of the things about this film that I think these filmmakers are so stunning about is bringing that together on the screen in the way that they so beautifully have. Thank you.
Actually, if I can provide concrete ideas, there were a few books that we really enjoyed when we were researching this film, and one of them was A Tree by David Suzuki, which is about the life of a tree, and another one was The Hidden Life of Trees? Yes, The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben, who's a German forester. So I would suggest you look at those in your library, and if you are game to get out in the actual forest, some of the Victorian Forest Alliance people outside take people on citizen science explorations of the forests, and they also do night spotting for things like greater gliders and also family events for the permaculture mother over there. So those are things in our neighbourhood, and they're really concrete, simple things, and it doesn't require getting, sad or depressed or lying in front of a bulldozer. It just means going out, getting there and exploring and understanding what our forests look like and having a relationship with them.
I think we've got time for one more question. The bar is going to be open for a little while after this, so you may wish to hang around and have a chat. I think we've got one here.
Hi, I'm currently an environmental science student, and while I value the theoretical and academic side of it, sometimes I do feel sort of held back by the confines of the classroom from pursuing true conservation. And there was a part in the film where it touched on how you felt sort of held back by the small microphone while in Parliament. And I was wondering how you sort of overcame those constraints to still pursue your larger passions that you couldn't do within Parliament.
Yes, well, thank you. What I did feel always comfortable about in Parliament was being true to how I felt about the priorities, which are to keep this planet alive and habitable and full of happiness and life and love and laughter for human beings and, of course, for our fellow creatures. There's very little of that. Talk about that at Senate doors when they're all there in the morning and they want to really know about the latest scandal or gossip or political outrage, but get on to the important issue of managing this planet and its future, managing this country and its forests, and the pens go down. And now, that's part of our wider absorption with scandal and gossip and human anthropocentric view of the world. But this planet can do without us. We can't do without it. And so I think it's very important you get that degree. As you'll know, once you get an ecological degree of some sort, the people who most want you to work for them are the big oil, gas, coal, logging, exploitative companies, because they've got a lot of window dressing and greenwashing to do. If you do that, you can save some pennies, and there's a lot of information to bring with you out of it. But my suggestion is get that degree and then move into active environmentalism. Not too many paying jobs in it, that's the problem. Although, our little foundation now employs 23 people. I feel so good about that. And people are generous in supporting that because they want to see activism. So this is the start of a very big wave. You're very well placed to be in that wave. Look after yourself, get that degree, enjoy the rest of life, but when it gets down to it, back those people who are taking action for this beautiful, vibrant little planet, which so far as we know is the only one like it in the universe.
And if you do want to take one of those little concrete actions that can lead to a groundswell, there are a lot of opportunities at those stalls that you heard about in the foyer. I want to say a huge thank you to Laurence, Billiet, Rachael, Antony and Bob Brown.